We left off, we were talking about cognitive development during the adolescent stage, and we had looked at some characteristics of formal operation. Again, Piaget's fourth stage, and according to Piaget, the final stage. Later on, when we get to young adulthood, we'll talk about cognitive development and what tends to happen during that stage in relationship to Piaget. But Piaget basically had concluded that at the end of this stage, that's pretty much was the extent of cognitive development or the major evolving processes. So we looked at introspection, the adolescents beginning to think about thought, and then we looked at how the thought process has become more abstract, how the teenager is able to focus on several dimensions and to generate and test hypotheses. And we looked at a number of examples with that. Another characteristic is sometimes referred to as pseudo-stupidity, kind of characterizing thought processes of the adolescent. And that is the adolescent's tendency to make some things more complex than they really are. Now, based on what we've already talked about, can you think of any reason why the young adolescent might have a tendency to do that? It could be self-doubt. Egocentrism is going to clearly play a part in it. We'll talk more about that actually in a moment in terms of the adolescent kind of things tend to kind of evolve and a focus around them. And so they tend to intensify their experiences of life. And we often talk about the young adolescent tends to almost dramatize life. And so highs are extremely high, lows are extremely low. I think some of that comes from the introspection. Because now adolescents are able to look at and think about both that in terms of their ability to think more abstractly, are able to look at situations differently than they would have before. And I think what happens sometimes is the young adolescent sometimes tends to overanalyze a given situation and to think about it in more ways than are necessary. Adults will look at a situation that they're confronted with and see it as being a fairly simple decision, or a very simple explanation to what has happened. And for the young adolescent who's able to look at that in multiple dimensions, even though that may not necessarily be necessary in this situation, will often make it more involved, more complex, than it really is. A simple example, I remember a young 14-year-old a number of years ago had come to see me in my office and was just all upset. Life had come to an end. She had broken up with her boyfriend, and she'd had a conversation with her mom, and her mom's reaction was very, very simple. Any guesses about what her mom told her? Basically, her mom's reaction, it was interesting because we don't hear these terms probably as much today, but her mom, basically explained to her very, very simply that it was not that big a deal. It was only puppy love, is what she told her, and that there are more guys out there, And her mother looked at this situation, this adolescent crisis, and saw it as being what? From an adult perspective at 14. Minor. It was no big deal. She surely wasn't going to marry this boy at 14, and it wasn't that big of a deal. But for the 14-year-old, it was a big deal. It was a crisis because the 14-year-old believed what? Again, from the adolescent's perspective. What did she really believe? That it was true love and it would last forever. And as much as she knew and understood love at that point, at age of 14, that's probably what she really, really believed. And so she clearly had probably overanalyzed the crisis dimension of it, and she really used statements that my life is over, how can I go on living? She wasn't seriously contemplating suicide or anything like that, but for her it was a crisis, and she needed someone to understand. And so we talked about it, and I probably maybe empathized with her a little bit differently maybe than her parents had at that moment, and the bottom line is I think this was like on a Wednesday. She had a new boyfriend by Friday, and life went on, But again, there's this tendency to kind of look at a situation and overanalyze it, and make it much more difficult than it really is. And some of it simply is the new skills, the evolving ability to look at a situation in different kinds of ways. I said earlier that students have a tendency to do this, and I think they do sometimes. My guess is there's probably one or two of you in this room that is taking a test on a given day, and you read the question. And your first instinct is, most of the time, what the correct answer is. But then what do? You second guess yourself. You begin to think about it. You think about how the professor is trying to trick you, or what the missing word is in there someplace. And then all of a sudden you find yourself changing your answer. And then all of a sudden you find out what the correct answer is, and I'm amazed at how often your first thought was, your first answer often was the correct one. We get to sometimes making a question much more difficult than it was ever intended to be. But you take any question and you think about it hard enough, and you can probably make almost most of those answers somehow fit, and you just over-process it. And that's what the adolescent does sometimes. They just over-process, they over-analyze it, make it more difficult than it needs to be. Then there is the adolescent's imaginary audience. This is the tendency to think that they are the center of everyone else's world. Again, it goes back to some of the characteristics of egocentrism that we talked about during the toddler stage of life. A little bit different at this period of life, but the adolescent basically believes that the world kind of evolves around them. And they also believe that all eyes are, this is where the imaginary audience comes into play, on them all the time. And so the young adolescent, this tends to be more characteristic, I think, at the early part of the stage, tends to become a little bit overly what? Self-conscious. And sometimes a little bit overly self-absorbed in some ways. And this is where you will see, again, very characteristic, and not just females, but females and males alike. And other family members can't understand why in the world it takes the young adolescent an hour and a half to get ready for school in the morning. And why is that? Exactly. I can't only look good, I've got to look perfect. Every hair has got to be in the right place. And heaven forbid if there is any kind of a blemish, it must be before I walk out the door. Got to be covered up or somehow, made to look all right. And so there's an inordinate amount of time making sure that I look exactly right. Because there's this basic belief that when I walk out that door and I hit the school hallways, the whole world is looking at and focusing on me. Now, what's probably the reality? Probably very few people are really focused on every adolescent, and the only ones who are probably going to notice anything that's slightly out of place are? Teachers and parents. Probably is the adolescents, probably, close friends who are probably not overly concerned, anyway. Or at least the individuals that we hope would be most accepting. But there is this kind of belief that if something happens or if I do something really silly or really stupid, that everyone in the world is going to know about it. And so there is this imaginary audience. And again, the imaginary audience is probably not near as large as adolescents, believe that, that it is. But they do tend to be pretty self-conscious and pretty concerned about how they look, the things that they do. How they fit in, and the basic belief that somehow everyone in the world is watching and noticing and and paying attention. And so heaven forbid if I do anything that might be embarrassing or draw attention to me in a negative kind of way. And of course, likewise, if I do something wonderful, then obviously everyone should know, and that somehow will up my popularity, which often doesn't turn out to be the case, as well. So again, there is this imaginary audience. And again, they tend to believe that what concerns me, or what I'm worrying about, or what I'm interested in, or what I like is what everyone else is interested, likes as well. Even though, I have come to the understanding that people have different perspectives and different ways of looking at things, I still tend to see life kind of evolving around myself at this stage. And that, again, continues to decrease over the course of this period. And final characteristic is what we call the personal fable. The experience of special uniqueness and the sense of invincibility. And again, we're just going to kind of touch on this, fairly briefly. I find it interesting that the adolescent works really hard to be unique, to be their own individual. And we see this a lot of times in terms of dress and certain behaviors. But at the same time, particularly the young adolescent also spends a lot of time doing what? That almost contradicts their uniqueness, trying to fit in. And so you find them a lot of times conforming to some peer group of where they need to look and act just like everyone in their group, while at the same time they scream out, I want to be my own unique individual. And a lot of times that's the scream that goes to parents and family members. So again, the personal fable, experience of special uniqueness. Now, one of the struggles from a parent's point of view is the parent is continually trying to explain to their adolescent that they do what? And it's the words they utter very frequently as the adolescent is going through their variety of different experiences. And the parent often utters these words. I really understand what you're going through. And the young adolescent says what? No, you don't. There's no way you can understand what I'm going through because why? You're not me. I am unique. I'm special. I'm different. And the parent will say, but I was an adolescent once. And the other young adolescent will say what? What's their common response? Exactly. Different time. It's not the same. And if that doesn't work, they'll come back, which is one of the real struggles sometimes, because I think parents are generally really trying to convey that they really do understand. But then the adolescent's response is, but no one has ever gone through the embarrassment that I've gone through, or no one has ever hurt the way that I'm hurting right now, because somehow my experience is unique and different. And they really do believe that, even though someone may have shared a similar experience. Their mom and dad may have experienced a similar experience when they were that age as well. It's still not the same. Mine is somehow unique and different than theirs, as well as in some cases even different from their peers in some ways. And then there is, and this is an important one of understanding adolescence, is their sense of invincibility, which means what? What do adolescents believe? And many sincerely believe it. Something bad or negative won't happen to them. Now, the real struggle for parents is, and this is important to understand the difference, do adolescents necessarily believe that bad things don't happen? No. See, part of the problem is parents and other adults simply think that all I need to do is explain logically to adolescents the dangers of drinking and driving, or the dangers of premarital sex, or whatever, the dangers of drugs, or the dangers of jumping out of a boat at 40 miles an hour. We used to do that as well, or throw someone out of the boat as it was moving, And do the young adolescent believe that bad things can happen when you do those things? Yeah, they really do believe. It's not a question that those things have the consequences of negative outcomes. The problem is what is it that they sincerely believe? It won't happen to them. That somehow they are unique. And so, again, a lot of times we simply think, well, if we just logically rationalize and reason with teenagers, then that would, eliminate at-risk behaviors. It doesn't always do that, because it's not that they don't believe that there are dangers out there. It is their basic belief that bad things can't and won't happen to them. And that's what makes it hard. And that only begins to change when experiences in life get really close to home. And you begin to see some of that thinking shift and alter again, and I've seen this numerous times, where the young adolescent experiences the death of a close friend, due to a car accident, where seatbelts weren't worn, or drinking was involved, or they have a close friend who found themselves pregnant at 15, and then all of a sudden when it gets close enough to them personally, then they begin to maybe think about it differently. And then sometimes it still doesn't have the impact that we would think that it would. Again, going back to that invincibility as related to the personal fable. So again, some of the characteristics, and when we begin to look at parent-teen relationship and some other issues around social development, as well as some of the other things that are happening emotionally, we will see where some of these characteristics will come into play. All right, so we've looked at physical development, we've looked at cognitive development. We want to take a look at some aspects of emotional development. We want to, again, look at Erickson's next stage. And then we also want to look at some issues around self-esteem. I don't have this particularly on a slide, but Erickson's next stage is identity versus role confusion. Again, all along we've talked about a positive outcome and a corresponding negative outcome. One of the major issues for the adolescent, from the positive aspect, or from Erickson's perspective, is one of identity and developing a sense of identity. The negative flip side of that would be not to have developed a sense of identity. In other words, the adolescent trying to figure out and come to terms with who they are. What are some of the questions that adolescents begin to ask themselves at this stage of life, do you think, related to identity? Because really, it really is a period of great searching and trying to sort through. One of the main ones is career choices. Becomes an important issue at this stage. What else do they ask themselves? Or begin to ask themselves, and hopefully it develops over the course of this stage of life. What would be some other questions that an adolescent might ask themselves besides career choices? Religious beliefs, or just beliefs and values in general, and why does that become significant, do you think? Thinking about what we've already talked about in terms of cognitive development. Why all of a sudden would they begin to take a look at and ask themselves about religious beliefs or values that they hold or other things that they believe, whether that's about politics or moral beliefs? They're capable of abstract thought, exactly. And also, again, with introspection, they're now at a period of time when they're really able to think about what they really think about those things. Up to this point, for the most part, whether we're talking about beliefs, values, morals, for the most part, they have done what? Modeled or accepted what has been kind of instilled in them. And that's not a bad thing. But at some point in time, they actually begin to start to ask the questions, what do I think about these issues? What do I really believe? What is really important to me? What do I believe is right and wrong? What do I want to do with my life? They begin to ask questions about, why am I here? What's the purpose of life? What's my purpose in life? They also begin to ask the question about, who, up to this point, how I see myself and who I am has largely been kind of shaped by the environment of the world that I've kind of grown up with. And now all of a sudden I begin to ask myself, not only who am I at this point in life, but the more important question for the adolescent is, who do I want to be? And still at this point they're getting influences from peers who are saying, this is the person you ought to be. And parents are still trying to make strong statements about, here's who I want you to be. But at some point in time they've got to answer what important question? In spite of the other influences, who do I want to be? Who am I, and what is the type of person that I want to be? Now, as a young adolescent, I'm probably still probably strongly influenced by what friends think, what teachers think, coaches think, parents think. But I think as we begin to evolve through this stage, and as I begin to move through the high school years, all of a sudden I really begin to stop and I may take in the information that I get from those other sources, but at some point in time I really begin to ask that question for myself and make choices and decisions for myself. This is an aspect of development, I think, that often concerns adults and often concerns parents, and primarily because why? And if you were a parent of a teenager, you would probably have some of those same concerns and worries. What's the ultimate concern or fear or worry of the parent, of the teenager, as they start to go through this searching process? And this is true whether we're talking about values, beliefs, morals, careers, you name it. What's the concern? Concern of parents is that they'll make wrong decisions, or they'll become a different person than what I hope that they would become, or that they would believe or have values that are different than the ones that I share or are important to me, or that they're going to pick a career that I believe won't lead them to the success that I want them to have, or will cause them not to be as happy as I would like them to have. And that becomes legitimate, honest concerns of parents. However, why might it be important for the teenager to go through this searching process? Because I personally believe that it's vital. I think it's critical that the adolescent go through this search. Any thoughts about why that would be important? Okay, through experience, by trial and error, really learning what they really like. Clearly, it's important to open their eyes to what's out there and to take a look at what's out there. As you think about the preparation for young adulthood, what does this individual really need to come to terms with before they hit young adulthood? What do they need to take ownership of? Well, their actions for sure. And their actions are going to be influenced by how they answer those other questions. But I think they need to take ownership for who they really are. You know, I mean, parents obviously would hope that they would move into a young adulthood adapting many of the beliefs and values and morals that they share. And as a parent, I would hope the same thing. But the reality is that as I approach young adulthood, I really need to come to terms with who I am. And I need to take ownership of that and of my actions, you know, for it to really be useful to me. I can't take somebody else's identity, you know, I think into adulthood and it be useful to me. You know, and so I think it's important that they go through. And why would it be important for maybe them to do that at this stage? Because if they don't do it at this stage, I believe at some point in time they will. But some will wait and do it when they become a young adulthood. What's the advantage of doing it at this stage versus in the next stage of life or much later in life? Yeah, I mean, they will have made some choices, but at this stage, there's still a certain safety and security in the choices and decisions that they're making. You know, and here's a place where you still got the support of family and other adults to hopefully facilitate that process so that it has a positive, you know, outcome. A lot of some individuals don't do that searching and evaluation until they're out there, and the consequences of some of those choices and decisions may be more serious. And so I think it is a critical part of development at this stage of life that adolescents do that. And I think as adults who are relating to and working with adolescents, the question is, how do we help nurture that process in a way that will be positive, so that at the end of that process, they do develop a healthy, positive sense of who they are, versus Erickson's flip side of that, role confusion. And role confusion is nothing more than not knowing who I am, where I'm going, what I'm doing with my life. You know. Now, can you think of any reason why Erickson would say you would want a little bit of role confusion, particularly as we approach young adulthood? Why would some of that be a healthy, positive thing? Exactly, so that you keep analyzing your choices. Because no matter, you know, even though I get a fairly strong sense of who I am, what I believe, what I value, is for those of you who are young adults, what you probably have come to terms with is, in spite of, even if you've achieved a fairly sense of identity at that stage, you still experience changes. As you have experiences in life, that still is an ongoing, forever evolutionary process. You know, we're constantly changing, but we probably do less of that as we get older, if we've done a reasonably good job at this stage of life. One way of understanding this process of achieving identity is through, and I really like this because I think it helps us understand where different individuals may very well be. And that's what we refer to as identity statuses, and that there are 4 of them. See if I can get this over there where you can see it. And what it suggests is that an individual will be someplace in one of these 4 statuses. And obviously when we get to the end, and we'll look at identity achievement being that final process. But before we get to that, individuals are going to likely find themselves in one of 3 other statuses. And what we want to do is take a brief look at what these statuses look like. Now, what is suggested here And what I would like you to do, where it says crisis, what I'd like you to do is put in parentheses exploration. Because I like that word better than I do crisis. I mean, Erickson uses the term crisis in his theory, and this is clearly another theory for understanding the development of identity. But what the theorist suggests is that the crisis or exploration represents whether a person has gone through a period of exploration or whether they have not. And again, they use, sometimes they'll use the term crisis. Again, like I said, I like the word exploration, where I ask the questions. Have I gone through a period of time where I've asked the questions? What do I believe? What's important to me? What am I going to do with my life? What is the type of person that I want to be? And that I intentionally, consciously go through a period of time where I analyze and I evaluate the choices and the alternatives. And that's the exploration. Commitment simply refers to the fact that I have made choices and decisions in answering those questions. Either I have come to a place where I have made a commitment and I've made some decisions about, again, career choices, about beliefs, values, and morals, and made a commitment to the type of person that I see myself and how I want to be. So again, we've got 4 different identity statuses. And again, this is probably on the test one of the more challenging parts, is keeping these separated. Sometimes the terms will help you kind of determine again whether, and what you want to do is figure out, is there the presence or absence of exploration or the presence or absence of commitment? And that's really what you want to keep in your mind. The first status we want to look at is identity moratorium. So, can someone look at this model, and what situation is this person in? Can you kind of describe generally what's going on with this individual? Anyone take a shot at it?
They're just learning about who they are and feeling their way around.
All right, excellent. They're just kind of beginning to feel their way around, kind of taking a look at. So what are they doing? They are going through the exploration process. They're asking the questions, again, about what I believe, what I think, what I value, what's important to me, who I want to be. They're looking at options. They're looking at alternatives. But what? What's the second part? What haven't they done yet? They haven't committed. They haven't completely answered those questions. They're asking the questions. They're in that searching phase or stage of identity, of shaping their identity. But they haven't made commitments yet. They haven't decided yet. I've looked at it, I've thought maybe about this career or that career, but I haven't really made a strong commitment yet. But I'm looking at or exploring these options. I'm still looking at what I believe about this issue, or what I think about this issue. I've looked at the options, the alternatives, but I haven't made a decision yet. I know what my parents believe, and I know what my friends think about this. But, I haven't decided yet. I'm kind of torn in between. What do you think it's like, and again, you don't need to know this for the test, but what do you think it's like to be at this place in identity formation? What do you think it would feel like to be at this? And my guess is that many of us in this room have been at this place in our life at some point in time. And to some extent, we're kind of constantly there. But all of us have probably been in a place where we really went through some real searching, really asking some important questions. What's it feel like?
I think there would be fear and anxiety, and just wondering if you'll ever make a decision.
Exactly. There clearly is fear and anxiety because I'm still uncertain, And also, one of the other characteristics is this is the young adolescent that can still be pretty easily, what? Molded or persuaded. Because again, they haven't made a commitment. And so if some strong influence comes along, they're likely to shift and change their mind. But until they make that commitment, they may change their mind. And today, this is what I think and what I believe and what I'm going to do. And then tomorrow, it may be different. And I may waver back and forth between a number of things. And so there is a great deal of anxiety, a great deal of fear, a great deal of uncertainty, during this time. Adolescents at this stage tend to spend a lot of time daydreaming, as they kind of thinking through, some of these issues. It's not a bad place necessarily to be, because I think it's a part of the formation process. I've got to go through that searching, questioning phase. But at the same time, there's some anxiety until I finally come to terms with what I really think and what I really believe. So again, identity moratorium. There is the presence of exploration, but there's the absence of commitment. Then there is identity foreclosure. This is an interesting one. A lot of people would look at this and actually say this is not a bad place to be. And in actuality, this is probably where a lot of parents would like to see their adolescent. Someone would take a shot at explaining what's identity foreclosure, what's going on or not going on. Who are these adolescents? And again, it could be occurring for someone after adolescence to some extent. They've already made decisions about who they want to be. They've already made decisions about what they believe, what's important to them. They've already maybe made decisions about their career choices in life. But what haven't they done? Yeah, they've not really looked at other options. And for the most part, they have simply done what? Probably in most cases. They probably have adopted what their parents or other adults have instilled in them. And like I said, a lot of adults, a lot of parents would look at it and say, well, this is great, this is wonderful. What's the danger? Or is there any danger? And clearly there's commitment. These are individuals who know who they want to be, what they want to do, what they believe. You see any problem with this one, though? They probably, why? You're exactly right. They probably will go through the crisis later. Because why might that be? And I think most do. Why would they go through the crisis later? And these are individuals who will often go through it during young adulthood.
Because they find out that there are other beliefs and theories, and they start thinking about those or choices.
Yeah, all of a sudden as they are exposed to different choices in life, as they realize that there clearly are, in their experiences, as their world continues to broaden, they begin to realize that there are different ways of looking at situations, and that their life experiences may not necessarily match, their belief, value, moral systems that they bring into young adulthood. Because part of the problem is that they may not necessarily be their own. They may only be an extension of someone else's. What someone else has told them what? They carry it into that phase, basically believing and thinking that this is what's right, this is what I should do, this is who I should be, because someone else has told me. And I basically have accepted it and believed that, without going through a process of coming to terms with that. And again, I'm not suggesting as people go through the exploration they necessarily have to come out in some place different. They may come out exactly in the same place that they were at. The only difference is that those beliefs, those values, those morals, those decisions become their own and not someone else's. And I think that's what's important about that process. And so a lot of times what happens is that people really haven't come to terms with this is who I really want to be, what I really believe and think and want to do with my life, then sometimes it doesn't fit their life experiences. And that's where we get identity foreclosure. And then there clearly are some individuals that are what we refer to as identity diffusion. Someone want to take a shot at who these individuals are. I can tell you where you'll see many of these individuals.
They just don't know and they just don't care.
Good example. In many cases, they just don't know, and in often cases, they just don't care. Someone want to add to that description who these individuals are. There's no exploration, but there's also no commitment to anything. Your two adult brothers. Who are still living at home. Okay. How do they live life? Day to day. How do they make choices and decisions?
As they come.
As they come. What becomes the criteria for their choice and decisions most of the time? What they're feeling at that time. These are the individuals that just say, I kind of do what just feels right at the moment. Where are they heading? They have no idea. And as other people watch on, they have a sense that they're not really heading anywhere. And as you said, I think what's important is they're not, in many cases, absolutely concerned whatsoever. They just kind of float and kind of move through life as life kind of leads them. Now, what do you think is going on internally with these individuals? Some people would look and say, well, gosh, what better lifestyle can that be? No cares, no worries. Just get up in the day and kind of go how you feel led. Good place, maybe not so good a place. Clearly, one of the issues is these are individuals who often don't tend to have a lot of purpose or direction. I think in spite of the fact that they seem to have somewhat of a carefree life, what also tends to be their reality? Though they may not stop and look at it. These are individuals who often still internally, whether they exhibit it outwardly or not, still tend to be rather restless. They still tend to have some real internal anxiety. Now they may cover that, with that kind of carefree, kind of position in life. But I think at some point in time, what will happen for most of these individuals, and maybe not for some, our life eventually is going to catch up. At some point in time, you've got to ask the question, what am I going to do with my life, or am I going to do anything with my life? Is this the person that I really want to be? Am I achieving the things I really want to achieve in life? And at some point in time, I think they have to confront some of those issues. These are individuals who tend to kind of move through life pretty absorbed in their social life, and again, just kind of doing what feels fun and right. A lot of times not tending to take on a lot of responsibility. And you can I guess you can do that as long as others allow you to do that. But again, I think sometimes it eventually kind of catches up with you. This is probably an unfair characteristic, but I think of a number of the individuals that we often see on some of the more extreme talk shows. Tend to be individuals that have some characteristics of identity diffusion. I've always been intrigued with Jerry Springer and some of the individuals that they have on that show. And again, some of the attitude mindsets that are there. Not always a strong sense of direction sometimes. And then finally, there is identity achievement. And these are, again, the individuals who have gone through an exploration process. They've asked the questions, and at least at this point in time in their life, they've made commitments. They've made some choices and decisions. But there are also individuals who recognize and realize that some of this may change as they experience life and go through. These are individuals who tend to be highly motivated. They are achievement-oriented. These are individuals who tend to set goals for their lives and plans of actions to achieve those goals. And I think some of that is some of that is the fact that they have a sense of direction, and so they then pursue that sense of direction. They are less apt, compared to some of the other statuses, to be dependent on others because they have a strong sense of, here's who I am at this point in life, this is who I want to be at this point in my life, this is what I believe about these issues, this is what I believe is right and wrong for me, and this is what I value. And so this is where I invest my time and energy at this point in my life, realizing that it may change and evolve some as I move to the next stage. But there is that sense of direction. And Erickson would suggest, as hopefully as we approach young adulthood, that I would have developed some sense of identity, achievement, some sense of who I am, where I'm going, with my life. But I think would also acknowledge that in order to get there, we've got to go through sometimes some of those other statuses. And I think there may be some individuals that will actually in some way go through and find themselves in all four statuses, where they may find themselves for a brief period of time in that identity diffusion, where I don't have any sense of direction. I don't want any sense of direction. I just want to live carefree. And then as all of a sudden I realize that that's maybe not working or that I want more out of life, will then begin to go through that exploration process. Or maybe I go through a period of time where I feel pretty set because this is what people have told me and it seems to have felt right. And then all of a sudden at some point in time as I begin to experience different things in life, see different alternatives, different viewpoints, that I begin to look at some of that internally for myself. So again, Erickson's identity versus role confusion, and again, be familiar with these different statuses, that relate to that, hopefully, ultimately, identity achievement. The test questions are basically what they're going to do is describe a status. Simply going to describe whether there is the absence or presence of exploration and whether there is the absence or presence of commitment. And you just simply have to identify which of the statuses is it referring to. Students tend to have a pretty easy time with achievement. Is not one that tends to be real difficult. The extremes, it's the two in the middle that if anything gets confused, it's getting those two turned around. All right, what we want to do is to take a look at, again, in the area of emotional development, we've talked some about self-esteem as a part of emotional development. And again, to some extent, this is tied into identity in the sense of a part of, again, self-esteem and self-concept is how I see and feel about myself. But what we want to do is look at some more specifics about, again, how I view and see myself and the role that plays. Adolescents perceive themselves in more detailed ways, often defining themselves in terms of their uniqueness. And again, a lot of this is related to or tied into the fact of their cognitive processes. I'm able to think about how I see myself. I'm able to think about ways that I see myself as being unique and different from others. And so those thought processes allow myself to see myself in different kinds of ways, and allow myself to evaluate how I want to see myself. And so now I begin to, where I used to see myself more in maybe simply physical characteristics, now I begin to define myself more so in terms of personality characteristics and uniqueness of my personality, and how that's okay, and how I may really value how I stand out or I'm different. And some adolescents really thrive on being different. And some actually thrive on being out of step with others and not being a part of a specific group. And again, very much tied into how they see and feel about themselves. So again, their perception of themselves is more detailed, and they begin to look at and focus on ways in which they are unique. Self-esteem, again, as a component of self-concept, tends to fluctuate during early adolescence and gradually stabilizes by late adolescence. And again, I think some of that is related again to that formation of identity that I think that has taken place during this 6-year period of time. Again, I think as we move into adolescence and as adolescents are dealing with many of the drastic changes that are taking place in their lives, and as they come to terms with those kinds of changes, it can be an unsettling time. There can be a lot of uncertainty about how I see myself. But I begin to come to terms with it. I begin to adjust to those changes, begin to work through some of those changes. And again, as the drastic changes begin to kind of subside, then that self-esteem, my self-concept begins to stabilize as I move through, again, those later high school years. And I come to terms with both in terms of how I see myself and how I want to see myself, and hopefully feeling good about who I'm becoming. I'm also much less influenced by others, and hopefully much more confident in the person that I'm becoming. Females experience greater drops than males do in terms of self-esteem. And again, that's not significant in terms of whether males have high self-esteem and females have low self-esteem. It's not saying that at all. Only that females may experience somewhat greater drops, struggle a little bit more with self-esteem than males do. Can you think of any reason why? Why would self-esteem maybe be a little bit more of an issue for females than males? Excellent. Yeah. Clearly, I think females tend to be, and again, it's not that males aren't impacted, but I think females are more impacted by body image And again, that media's kind of stereotype of the, and we see it inundated almost every day on the news. And again, it's out there for males too, but I think females, it tends to be much more important in terms of that, again, that imaginary audience and that self-consciousness that somehow, I fit that, quote, perfect body image, And again, I think males deal with that, but I don't think they're quite as concerned and get quite as much focus and attention on that area about whether I'm too thin or I'm too heavy or my body proportions are exactly perfect. I think males are a little bit less concerned about that, as a group. And so I think body image clearly plays a role in that. And why there may be, again, when I'm struggling with or dealing with those physical changes, and maybe haven't reached, again, maturity physically, that might impact my self-esteem. Can you think of any other reasons why females might be somewhat more struggle with self-esteem issues a little bit more? Clearly, body image, I think, is a major one. Think of any other factors? We'll talk more about this when we talk about social development, but I also think that the nature of friendships and the quality of those friendships, and again, some of the vulnerability of those friendships may have more of an impact on self-esteem for females than it does, for males. And we'll talk about, some of the ways that those are different. We will look at some of the key factors that influence self-esteem during this stage, and then we'll begin to take a look at peer relationships as well.